Hello, my name is Jeremy Larson, and this is my project for CSC 436 Offensive Networking. My presentation will be on DISC assessment mentioned in Chapter 3. I chose this particular topic because I've always enjoyed personality tests and believe that anything that helps you to better understand either how you or someone else operates on an unconscious level will always be useful. So, let's begin. DISC is a system of assessing a person's personality and behavior. The assessment divides personality into four archetypical traits, which are typically labeled dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness. By determining where an individual's personality falls within the spectrum, additional traits and behavioral tendencies can be more easily and accurately ascribed to them. If this was a self-assessment, it can help you to recognize your own strengths and weaknesses, and better prepare you to compensate for them. If this was an external assessment, it can help provide direction on how to successfully interact with that individual, as well as help predict general responses to situations that the individual might have. The basis for DISC assessment is based on the work of Dr. William Moulton Marston, a lawyer and psychologist prominent during the 1920s and 30s. After studying normal, or typical, as it was referred to at the time, human behavior, he determined that people act on their emotions in one of four behavioral types: dominance, inducement, submission, and compliance. These responses were in turn influenced by whether or not the person viewed themselves as being in a friendly or unfriendly environment, and whether or not that person believed they were in control. It wasn't until 1956 when an industrial psychologist named Walter Clark constructed the initial DISC assessment using Marston's model as a basis, intended as a hiring tool to test potential employees. The assessment method has been altered and refined a great many times since to become a fully developed personality assessment tool, one that can be conducted internally on yourself or externally with a high level of accuracy. So, let's clearly define exactly what these traits are and what they can mean. Dominance describes the way a person deals with problems, asserts themselves, and controls situations. A dominant individual would tend to be very direct, strong-willed, assertive, and result-oriented. Influence describes the way a person deals with people, the way they communicate, and how they relate to others. An influential person would be more outgoing and enthusiastic, relatable, and lively. Steadiness, or supporter from our book, defines one's temperament, how patient, persistent, and thoughtful that person would be. This would be characterized by an even temper, humility, tactful, and accommodating interactions. Finally, conscientiousness is how one approaches and organizes their activities, procedures, and responsibilities. Such a person would be more analytical and precise, with a more reserved and private demeanor. Now, outside the pie chart we just made, two particular environmental qualifiers are intended to be picked. These qualifiers determine the scope for the behavior you are assessing within the DISC model. These qualifiers and their opposites are then placed at the cardinal points around the model. As mentioned above, the original qualifiers used by Marston were comfort level and perceived control. Chris Hagnaghi chose to use direct and indirect action, and task orientation versus people orientation help determine communication style externally. We'll proceed with that basis and figure out how to get some use out of this. If you can define some of the traits listed above, you can determine the particular quadrant the target tends to operate in. This not only tells you that the person's probable response to the environmental qualifiers, but also cues you into their opposite quadrant, which can tell you their potential weaknesses, as well as the least effective means of communicating with them. You can also determine these things in the opposite direction by observing their response to the environmental qualifiers. You can determine their probable manner of communication, and thereby know the best method to interact with them. Chris Hagnaghi also included a basic list of how to communicate with each type regarding a social engineering pretext, both using perceived authority and not, which I'm including because it helps illustrate the results you can get from profiling someone using the DISC tool. So, you've decided to use an authority pretext, presenting yourself as someone your target will believe is in charge, at least in that situation. If they are dominant, then be direct and straightforward. Firmly define the scope of the interaction. Be brief and clear about what you want. If they are an influencer, use a friendly and relaxed approach. Let the target do the majority of the talking. Let them know who you are, and that you're there to help them accomplish their task. If they are a supporter, be systematic and objective, but still relaxed and friendly. Clearly tell them what you need from them. Finally, if they are conscientious, provide details but seem reliable, recognize their position and responsibilities, and explain how you plan on getting exactly what you need. Now, the approaches and tactics are quite different if you're not being perceived as someone in charge. When confronting a dominant individual, emphasize what you need, but let them decide how to get it. Be logical and factual, not just endearing. When dealing with an influencer, be sure to interact with them in the decision process, but don't take charge. Experienced input from people and experts, more than facts and statistics, will be more liable to convince them. A supporter will be slower and more focused on how to accomplish the task. Make it about what the team needs, not simply what you need. Lastly, a conscientious target will need data, facts, and statistics. Anything that will prove this course of action is reliable and safe. Finally, here are the sources I used for this presentation, as well as a free online DISC test. Chris Hagenty mentioned he didn't like the majority of DISC assessment tests since they were scenario-based. However, this was the first test I found online, and it followed his preferred best-worst descriptor style. Hopefully you got something out of this. Enjoy your weekend.